Hello and welcome to Brain Says Strange Things. I'm Patrick, this is my brother Jordan, and this is the podcast where we talk about horror movies. This is going up in the month of February, so we thought to celebrate Black History Month, we would take a look at a couple of cult classics. The famous horror blaxploitation mashup Blacula, as well as its direct sequel, Scream Blacula Scream is the name of it, right? So Blacula and Scream Blacula Scream. These are very well-known kind of cult favorites. We had never seen them before, so we decided to watch them together for the first time. And we'll talk first about the original Blacula. So it's basically what it sounds like for those unfamiliar. Essentially, the first film is kind of an origin story for Blacula. He was originally an African prince who existed during the time of the original Dracula. And when he traveled to Transylvania in order to convince Count Dracula to end, I guess, the slave trade in Transylvania at the time, the negotiations didn't go so well, and long story short, the African prince was basically turned into a vampire and trapped in a coffin as kind of a punishment. So Dracula intended this African prince, who he dubbed Blacula, to kind of suffer for eternity.
And his wife was there, too.
And Blacula's wife was basically locked in with him and presumably just died eventually. It's a little unclear. But, of course, Blacula then is revived in what was then the present day, of course, the 1970s, and starts, killing people. And he encounters a woman who resembles, she's kind of an exact double for his wife, who had died, years ago. So he's kind of trying to seduce her and bring her into the whole vampire fold.
As that normally happens in the Dracula story.
Right. So this, as it sounds like, this is all very, very familiar vampire movie tropes. The hook here is that it is, black actors, black vampires, and this was
blue vampire.
Yeah, and this was kind of the height of blaxploitation.
Well, this was the beginning, actually.
Okay.
Yeah.
Which I don't know a lot about blaxploitation. Like, these
I don't
are
know.
like
I'm not really an expert.
Blaxploitation films I've seen. So I'm coming at it more from like a horror movie standpoint, which from that perspective, just as a movie, it was okay. What did you think of Blacula?
I think that's kind of it. It's all right. The other one is much better.
Did you think so?
I thought so.
Okay. I actually prefer the first one, but we can get into that a little bit.
You're gonna have to kind of refresh me on the first one. They're kind of similar.
Yeah.
They're pretty close.
Well, yeah. The first one, it's definitely not a good movie, but I feel like it was really entertaining for us to watch. It was really, it was just cheesy. Not some things didn't completely make sense. Like there were the various vampires. There was no consistency to how vampires were portrayed in this movie, which is one thing that confused me.
How they looked or acted.
Right, because sometimes they would have like really terrible like blue or green makeup and just be wearing these cheap, flimsy capes, and sometimes they would look normal. And then there was the one that acted almost like feral, right, at the morgue. And then sometimes they would be like zombies, but Blacula himself was completely in control of his mental faculties.
They were usually like zombies, except for the fact that they're just colored differently. And, well, maybe that's saying something about race.
Maybe, but I don't know what it was saying.
No one knows what they're saying. Like, some of them are blue and some are gray and some are, like, you couldn't even figure that out. And at first I thought, like, maybe... Well, when they transform the white people, maybe they turn a specific color. And then when they transform the black people, they turn a specific color. But no, they were just like doing whatever they wanted to do.
Yeah, it was. So that was one thing I didn't like about the movie.
I have one question about like Dracula, or Blacula, sorry.
Okay.
Is why is he all of a sudden now the king of the vampires?
Right.
He was bitten by Dracula.
Yeah.
So why all of a sudden... So I guess now all these years later, Dracula's gone.
That's what I'm
possibly?
assuming. Like, Dracula's not in the picture.
So why does he all of a sudden assume that... Because he's got more powers than regular vampires, right? He can control them.
See, that was all unclear.
There's way too much that's unclear.
He definitely
about it.
seemed more powerful.
Yeah, but is this because he's been a vampire longer, and
or
got
because
powers?
he was like directly created
That
by
could be
Dracula?
as well,
So in a
because-
weird way, he was Dracula's successor, even
Yes.
though Dracula initially did it as a punishment. None of those questions are going to be answered in this movie.
But there's also the wife too. He meets. We assume she dies,
right.
and then they have the same actress come back, but she's supposed to be just a person
Sure.
that looks like her.
Which we've seen millions of
they do
times
that
in
in
monster
Dracula
movies and vampire movies.
But then she's falling under his spell,
Right.
becoming his wife again.
Right.
But it doesn't seem like it's much of a spell. He's pretty much just like, you look like my wife.
Right. Well, it's...
Would you want to be my wife in this life?
Right.
And she's kind of like, that sounds alright.
Yeah, it's kind of unclear whether it's him using his hypnotic powers on her, or if she's just naturally drawn to this charismatic character.
Yeah, is she really reincarnated, or
Is
does
she
she
actually
just happen to look
reincarnated?
like?
Does she just resemble him? Again, none of this is really addressed or answered in the movie. So as like a vampire mythology movie, this is pretty flat. This doesn't really have much to offer. What I did enjoy about the movie, though, is I like Blacula himself. I mean, he's
actor.
very well cast, this character, or this actor as Blacula. So I liked him. He had a certain charisma. And I guess I just like the cheesy, kind of trashy nature of the movie. Like, I like that they use kind of like, like jazzy, like what was then modern music on the score to the movie. So it wasn't a good movie, but it was just kind of fun to watch. It was kind of like what you would expect Blacula would be, So I enjoyed it on that level. I mean, we laughed a lot watching it.
I think it's more of like a typical kind of so bad it's good movie.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
Rather than... But
Yeah.
I mean, like, rather than an exploitation or Blaxploitation movie. See, now when I see the second one, that's what I would think of when I think of like a Blacula movie.
Okay.
This one seems very, very... I know it was cheap.
Oh, yeah.
It came across as very cheap.
Very
I
cheap.
gotta assume like they had kind of like a similar budget on these movies, but like... It just looked like light years ahead of the other.
Well, let's go into the second one because
Well, you can
you're right. The second one looks a lot better. I mean, it still looks cheap,
Right.
But by comparison, it's technically, like technical aspects, a better film.
Yes. Well, that's what I mean. When I thought about it, I thought like the first one is like an assignment for like school that they or like a test that they didn't study for, and then they took it and then they failed. So I think the movie kind of fails on that level because there's no mythology like with Dracula. It's almost like they've heard of Dracula and they're like, oh crap, I got to write a paper on Dracula.
Yeah. We have to make a black.
Listen really quick.
We have to make a black Dracula. I thought
even the name, it's like Blacula.
Blackula.
The origin is so lame, though.
Thank God for that name. I think the name of these movies has what's really kept them alive.
Well, that's the exploitation part.
Yeah. Well, and also, I mean, there's such a camp appeal. It's so funny, the name Blacula. I don't think it would have the place in culture that it has without that title. So I do give them props for that. And I actually think it wasn't a bad origin, like how he became Blacula. I thought that was okay. It was just, there was nothing original after that.
He kind of just became Blacula.
Well, Dracula, I like
Dracula
the idea of like this African prince having visited the original Dracula, and Dracula makes him a vampire to punish him. I mean, the idea that he would be buried alive for eternity.
I wish some of that would have worked in a little later, because honestly, I forgot about that
stuff.
Yeah,
after the origin,
I almost feel like you're telling me that for the first time.
Yeah, no, after the origin, it was not good. But I mean, credit where it's due. I think it has.
He was good. He had a good like announcer commanding voice.
Great.
He reminded me a lot of Christopher Lee as Dracula.
Yeah, I would like to see Blacula like in a better movie than either of these two. Like, just take that character and change everything else. Anyway,
but I mean, I didn't like that first one because it was just so plain, and the things that stood out to it are just pretty much things that you would find in any other movie.
Yeah.
It's not unique to the exploitation genre.
Once they
it's
set up...
it's kind of typical of any kind of bad movie.
Right.
That's why, like, I don't think I'm even going to remember what this movie like a year from now.
Yeah.
The sequel kind of gets it a little more right. Where I was going with that analogy is like this is like then they take the test again a second time and they study a little more. They get a C.
Okay.
They still fail.
So maybe they should
get like a middle of the road.
Maybe
But
they
it's
should have
a
done
little
third
bit of an improvement. I like it.
Okay, well, let's talk about Scream, Blacula, Scream, because I actually preferred the first one.
Okay. I want to know why you don't like this one.
In Scream, Blacula, Scream, they bring in basically two new elements. The idea of voodoo in a contemporary setting, which is has the potential to be interesting in a vampire film, and they bring in Pam Grier, a big name in Blaxploitation cinema. So she's kind of the love interest in this movie. So Blacula is resurrected by this guy who is involved with this voodoo, I don't know what to call him, a cult. Pam Grier is also involved with this group. And it's a little vague at the beginning of this movie, but I think basically what's happened is that the leader of these voodoo people has passed away, this elderly kind of like priestess, whatever, and the guy wants to inherit that role in the community. But the community rejects him, right? They would rather have Pam Grier's character kind of inherit the leadership. Yeah, that's what was going on, I think.
Yeah, it's not very clear.
So the guy, he encounters this like homeless weirdo who somehow has Blacula's remains.
He was Black Torgo.
Yeah, Blorgo from the first movie. And through a voodoo ritual, this guy resurrects Blacula, thinking that Blacula will give him some kind of great power. But basically, Blacula just makes this guy into kind of his Renfield / roommate / life partner. I'm not sure what was going on there. They live together, cohabitate. So once Blacula is back, this is my problem. I feel like the movie kind of meandered a little bit. It didn't really have the drive that the first one had, which, while it was a cliche, it did move the plot along with him wanting to seduce this woman.
Yeah.
Eventually, in Scream, Blacula, Scream, it comes out that he wants Pam Grier's character to actually use her voodoo to cure him of being a vampire, which, again, has the potential to be interesting, but I don't know that it came across as much in this movie. So what are some initial thoughts that you had, and then I'll kind of go into why I didn't like it as much.
Well, I think I agree with you, because I thought about that with the first one. It has the kind of, almost like kind of cute. It's got a detective story going along with it. It's not a good detective story.
But
it's got actually kind of like them pursuing, scene with him pursuing.
It was like a fun, bad movie to watch. The plot like moved along.
Also, the female character is in it more. Pam Grier is not in this movie.
And really,
it's such a waste.
Very much a waste.
When she was in it, she was good. But
but even the role they gave her in this too, I feel like she should be a character with some more agency.
Well, I didn't get that character at all. Like, you explaining that, I didn't get that.
Yeah, it was pretty vague.
It was just like,
I mean, I might have it wrong.
They made it sound like she was into voodoo the same way that someone would be into like Tupperware or something.
Oh no, she was like involved in this voodoo community.
Yeah, it was just like, well...
But I don't think they wanted to... It's like they almost couldn't commit to the voodoo line.
Well, I also... I agree about that, too, because I agree that they didn't do the voodoo story well. But I like that it was in there.
Well, at first I was excited.
I feel like they're trying.
Because it started out with the voodoo, and I was like, oh, okay, this is like a new... This could be really interesting, like African, voodoo. Like, okay, this might go somewhere. But I feel like... with the Pam Grier character, they wanted her to seem like a kind of normal, appealing person.
That's what kind of threw me a little bit.
They couldn't make her into like some person who's hardcore into like weird voodoo ceremonies.
Yeah, that's why it didn't come across.
But yet she was supposed to be. So yeah, I feel like they kind of like couldn't really commit to the voodoo in the way that they probably should have to make a more interesting movie.
Well, I think what they maybe tried to do is they wanted her to be the good guy.
Right.
The good protagonist, he's obviously the antagonist.
Right.
And the whole goal is to kind of get them to work together so he can kind of exercise his demon, I guess was what he says. which I think is a really cool idea.
Yes.
They threw it in at the last 10
Yeah,
minutes.
exactly.
So they
took a long time to
the
get
story
there.
up.
Yeah. Well,
The
and
whole
middle,
movie should have been building up.
Yeah, and most of the movie was just kind of meandering. Like, Blacula didn't really have a motivation in the way that he did in the first movie. This movie, as I said, it's more technically well made. Like, the cinematography is better. It looks more like a real movie. I mean, it's still cheap. It's still like 70s exploitation, but compared to the first one, you can see they put a little bit more effort into how it looked. The score is also a more traditional horror score, which I didn't like as much. You know, I like the kind of grubby, funky aspect to the first film.
They had that a little in Blacula Scream.
A little bit, but not nearly as much as the first movie. I feel
No,
like
the first one's very
I
70s.
actually, even though like plot wise, the first one was like typical horror movie tropes. I feel like the second one kind of looked and felt more like a typical horror film, whereas the first one had some of that kind of gritty funkiness that you want of like 70s exploitation cinema, and I think they kind of polished that a little bit in Blacula Scream. And to me, it was just a little bit more boring of a movie. It moved slower too. It was just kind of like really took its time getting where it was going, and I just didn't like it as much.
But he beats up pimps.
Oh yeah,
Like,
I mean, there was, it was okay.
They do 70s type stuff. That's why I think like this one seems more like that to me. Like
I think this one had more.
exploitation
I think this one had more
elements.
I think this one had more potential. But at the end of the day, I enjoyed watching the first one more. Neither are good movies.
No, this is a kind of a ridiculous argument. Or as that guy would say, laughs and said, ridiculous.
But if I was gonna watch a bad kick back with friends and watch like a bad 70s exploitation movie, I would rather watch the first Blacula.
Yeah, but is that the scale we're rating them? Okay.
I think that
then maybe I'll agree with you.
I think that's the appropriate scale by which to evaluate the Blacula films.
Okay.
Okay. Well, anything else you particularly liked or didn't like about these movies?
I think I said what I liked about it.
One.
It's hard to remember everything about him.
One thing I thought that was kind of a missed opportunity was
Another missed opportunity?
Yeah, was that I wish they would have played with him as like kind of a man out of time a little bit. You know, like I mean, he was like from back hundreds of years ago,
Right.
And he's revived in the funky, modern swinging 70s.
Well, they did do that though in the second one when they were asking for bread.
That was the one instance of that with the
Alright,
slang.
but they tried it.
The slang for bread. Yeah, that was the one instance of it.
Uh-huh.
But otherwise, he was just very comfortable and at home in the modern day.
Oh,
so
see, that's a problem. That's a problem with the first and the second one, actually. That's a big problem with all of them. And with the first one, mainly because they're trying to figure out who's killing people. Right away, they suspect. Oh yeah, they they set up that Dracula exists in this world.
Yeah.
In the first scene of the first movie,
Right.
the characters comment like, "Oh, you mean Dracula? You mean like from those movies? Ha ha ha!"
Right.
And then they die. Of
Yeah,
course, 'cause
so
they get overconfident.
people are
or
aware
whatever.
of Dracula as like a cultural myth.
Yeah, and then later when Blacula shows up, he's dressed like a like Halloween Express Grandpa Munster.
Yeah.
He is Dracula.
Yeah, he looks like
walking
a
around
vampire,
town,
yeah.
and he's trying to convince people otherwise. He's like, I don't know what you're talking about. Who is this Dracula?
Right.
Victims are appearing with holes on their necks.
Right.
We've already established that Dracula does exist.
Right. But people don't necessarily believe
he's-
that.
They don't
Dracula
necessarily
exists.
believe it. But the chief of police, the main cop, whatever he is, he does suspect it. And he's interviewing Dracula. They sit at the exact same table with him dressed in fully Dracula garb, and they don't suspect a single thing.
Yeah, well,
then
eventually they do. But
I don't-
I know exactly what you're saying. He's walking around dressed like a vampire.
Yeah.
It's very weird.
And he takes time out to see now. Is this the first one or the second one where he transforms into a bat like right in front of somebody? He could have walked.
That was the second one.
Okay. Maybe I hated them equally.
Yeah. Well, I mean, they're not
but-
leagues. They're not leagues apart.
Yeah.
I also didn't understand the whole look of Blacula with the weird facial hair and the fuzzy cheeks. I didn't
Kind of
understand.
werewolf-like.
It was sort of werewolf-like, and I also didn't understand why he sometimes looked like that and why he sometimes looked like just a more regular person. Albeit still dressed.
That's
like
kind
a
of
vampire.
standard of vampire movies too, though.
Well,
where they have human form.
But I thought it would be okay, when he's gonna in like full bloodlust mode, he transforms in that way. But it didn't seem to be consistent.
It kind of was like that.
Was it?
Sort
I just
of.
thought that was weird. And also, again, he was the only vampire that seemed to exhibit that particular trait.
Right, he had a bunch of zombie henchmen.
Right.
Pretty much.
Including the original Dracula from the first scene in the first movie didn't seem to transform at all when he attacked, whatever. So, what more can you say about Blacula and Blackula Scream? I mean,
You should see them. It's interesting.
Yeah, they're fun. They're fun movies to watch, but
fun.
they're not good.
I think they're good fun movies, but they're kind of sloppy.
Oh, very.
So
sloppy.
maybe that's the fun and charm of it.
Exactly. Sometimes I kind of like that a little bit. And then there's also Blackenstein was a film that they made after this.
Got to try to find that one.
Do you know if there's any other like Blaxploitation mixed with horror kind of movies? Because I don't really know of any. But again, I'm not an expert in.
Well, actually, I was looking up. There was that recent one, or somewhat recent, maybe like 90s, that Eddie Murphy one. Remember Vampire in Brooklyn? Something like that.
Okay.
That one came up.
Okay.
Otherwise,
so not many.
Otherwise, no, not very many.
Yeah, and I think Blacula actually was the first black vampire on screen, as far as I know.
So they should have taken that like a little further instead of just making it a movie where it's almost like he just happens to be black.
They definitely could have done a lot more with the Blacula concept, and who knows, in this modern era where they're remaking everything, we might see Blacula on screen again.
Well, remember in the second one when it's like when the cop almost kills him, and you were like, no, a white guy can't kill black.
Right? No,
but like obviously that probably couldn't happen in a movie of this era like that.
Right.
I would never want to say never, but it's like in this movie, it's like I could see that happening because they didn't seem to follow any kind of rule or anything.
Right.
They're just kind of all over the place. Like it didn't matter that it was about him being a black character,
right?
Which it probably should since it's calling itself Blacula.
Right.
I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, I feel like there's a lot of missed opportunities in this movie.
Yep. Fun, but could have been better movies.
I wish they would have made more because I feel like they could. You don't, but I feel like they kind of took a little bit of step up. I think they could have gotten a little better, but
I think they should make another Blacula movie. Yeah.
With that dude, Idris Elba.
Yeah.
He could be Blacula.
Okay, I would watch it. So there you go. There's our pick for the new Blacula.
Calling it now.
All right. Well, I hope that this contribution to Black History Month was appreciated by all of our viewers. And I guess that wraps it up for Blacula and Scream Blacula Scream. We will be back again talking about some good, bad,
anywhere in between
movies real soon. Thanks for watching Brain Says Strange Things. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.